Hi class, back again with chapter 8, and we're going to get started on objective 4. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Hope you guys are doing well today, and I hope you're enjoying chapter 8. Let's see here. Okay, so we're going to discuss, no, we ain't about to do that. Okay, sorry, I thought I had it in the right place. Objective 4, compare and contrast sleep disorders. You should probably be familiar with a lot of these sleep disorders, if not all of them. So we'll start with insomnia. Insomnia is a little hard to define because people think they need this much sleep, but do they really need this much sleep? Hard to say, but usually it comes down to, is it really bothering people and making their quality of life difficult? It tends to come in one of three ways. One is onset insomnia, and that means you can't get to sleep at night. That's more common when you're young. And some of that is just circadian rhythm issues. Maintenance insomnia means you can't stay asleep at night. You keep on waking up, and that usually is sleep apnea. And then termination insomnia means you wake up too early, so it's on the termination phase of sleep that you have problems. And so sleeping pills are not a good way to go. They tend to be addictive. You tend to get dependent on them. So at any rate, best thing to do is try to reset that circadian rhythm if you have termination or onset problems, and then get that sleep apnea treated if it's a problem with maintenance. So sleep apnea is a breathing problem. It's common in older people and obese people, especially men. And what happens is the airways just get closed down, usually because you're laying on your back and there's a lot of weight coming down. You get some airway problems. And what happens when you get your airway closed down is you can't breathe, and then you wake up. And so a lot of times they don't realize that they stop breathing, because when they wake up, they start breathing again. And so sleep deprivation results. And in fact, you can get just deprivation of oxygen from stopping breathing so frequently, and that can damage the brain. So it's really worth it to get checked out, get a CPAP, or like we used to do back in the old days, just sleep on your side, because for most people that'll take care of it. And you can make it uncomfortable to sleep on your back if you put something behind you or something like that. Narcolepsy tends to run in families, tends to be a genetic problem. It's basically getting an attack of just super sleepiness, where all of a sudden you just sort of fall down into sleep. If you do fall down, we call that cataplexy, which is a kind of a paralysis that happens. And that's because in some people with narcolepsy, they fall straight into REM sleep, and then you get the cataplexy associated with the REM sleep, because remember, the pons is going to shut down the movement of the body during REM sleep. A lot of times they get hypnagogic hallucinations, which are strange visions that you would get when you're falling asleep. They usually occur in stage 1 sleep. Typically, the cause of this is going to be orexin cell death. Remember that orexin is coming from the hypothalamus, and it's involved in keeping us awake during the day. And so people with narcolepsy will sleep, kind of like a baby does all day long. Okay, well, we've got some other sleep disorders here. Periodic limb movement is just a lot of twitching of the limbs. REM behavior disorder means that you are acting out your dreams. You don't have that paralysis that typically goes with REM. It's usually a problem with the pons. Night terrors is something children get, and it's where they just start screaming wildly in the middle of the night. Usually happens during stage 3 or 4 sleep. Another thing that happens during stage 3 or 4 sleep is sleepwalking, and also sexsomnia. And sleepwalking is the just walking around. Again, usually happens in children. Sexsomnia is just kind of doing sexual activities in the middle of the night. It might be jerking off, might be molesting someone next to you, and things like that. It doesn't tend to occur during a dream, remember, because you're not moving much during dreams. So stages 3 and 4 sleep are really where that's going to be happening. Okay, we're going to briefly talk about why animals sleep and why humans sleep, because of course we are animals too. Well, one reason why we sleep is to save energy. And so it may be that we evolved sleep in order to save energy during times in which we may not need to be finding food. And so we might as well just chill instead of wasting a whole bunch of energy so we have to get more food. During sleep, your temperature is decreasing. You're not burning as many calories. And some animals sleep more than others. So you can see on this, if you look at like the horse, it only sleeps like a couple of hours a day, whereas humans are going to sleep about 8 hours a day. The lion is going to sleep, more like 12, 13, 14 hours a day. And so it depends on how rich your food is in calories. If you eat grass, you basically have to eat all day long. So you can't really afford to sleep. But for those animals who can afford to sleep, they do tend to save energy by sleeping. Okay, well, another possible reason why we sleep is to improve our memory. One of the things we've shown over and over again in experiments is that if you have people learn something and then sleep versus a group that doesn't sleep, the people who sleep tend to remember what they learned better. And so we see this kind of, if you look at the hippocampus during sleep, it seems to be practicing activities. It seems to be going over memories. And the more hippocampus activity, the better the performance on the test the next day. And sleep spindles, as I mentioned before, that happen in stage 2, those bursts of activity seem to be involved in learning as well. And people who have more of those sleep spindles tend to do better on the test the next day too. So it may be that what we're doing is kind of pruning out those connections. What's important, what's not important. Some connections might get weakened during sleep, some connections might be strengthened. But nonetheless, I mean, the lesson for that for the college student is get some sleep because you're trying to learn a lot of stuff. Okay. If we take out REM sleep, it tends to inhibit motor learning. So that may be things like learning how to drive a car, learning how to do a dance or something like that, but some learning that involves movement. If we knock out NREM sleep, which is the non-REM sleep, so it'd be stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, that tends to inhibit verbal learning, things like, who's the president of the United States, that kind of learning. But people with no REM, as I was mentioning before, those serotonin agonists like the antidepressants will take out REM, but that doesn't seem to be terrible for people's memory. So people can live without REM sleep, and somehow they do compensate. But after you lack a period of REM sleep, we do tend to make up for it as well. So the brain sort of wants it. But anyway, we can just say pretty effectively, sleep is involved in memory and it's really important for all kinds of memory. Okay, finally, a biological explanation for why dreaming occurs is the activation synthesis hypothesis. And that is the idea that, our brains are not asleep when we're asleep. They're obviously doing all this activity and we're seeing all this activity. And what happens is that the brain basically needs to stay active according to this hypothesis. That's the activation part, right? The brain needs to stay active. It's doing stuff. It's enhancing memories and stuff like that. But what happens is that we create a synthesis of this area over here is active, this area over here is active, this area over here is active. And the synthesis is the story that we make up, which is the dream. And so it makes some sense if you look at parts of the brain that are active. For example, parts of the visual system tend to be very active during REM sleep. Well, surprise, surprise, dreams tend to be very visual. We don't tend to see smell in dreams. Think of the last time you smelled something in a dream. Think of the last time you tasted something in a dream. You don't even, I was going to say SHIT, but I'm not going to. Stuff happens to you in a dream. You might get punched, but you don't feel pain. You don't tend to have much feeling, but you do have a lot of visual sensations. Your limbic system is active. We have a lot of anxiety in dreams. It's not surprising that dreams are very emotional because that limbic system is involved in emotion. The prefrontal cortex up here, the reasoning and planning and making sense of the world, is inactive. So it makes sense that reason and disbelief is suspended. We also have a weak memory because that is an area that's important for short-term memory, and we'll talk about that. later on when we get to the memory chapter. So memory and dreams is not too great. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the dreaming chapter and look forward to the next set of videos. Okay, have a great day.